What is up, bros and broettes? I'm Inkslasher, and today we are going to be answering the question, how good is the GPMG? In this series, we look at weapons in depth, looking at all of their stats and a best class setup, and by the end of the video, we can decide how good is this weapon. Now, this weapon is one of the new LMGs in the game. It was added in the Winter Siege update, and it's an interesting one. If I was to compare it to one of the other LMGs in the game, I would probably say it's most like the MG15. But, as always, guys, if you do enjoy the series, feel free to hit that like button, and without further ado, let's hop in and look at the stats. As always, starting with damage. So the damage for the GPMG is one of the weirdest I've ever seen for a weapon in Call of Duty. It's simple, but at the same time really odd. Basically, it's either going to be 30 damage or 24 damage. Now, the weird part is the range where it drops from 30 to 24 damage. It drops off at 127 meters, which is a range that you're almost never going to get into a gunfight with. So basically, this weapon is almost always going to be a 4-bullet kill, unless there's some sort of bullet penetration or they're really far away. So the next thing we're going to look at here is the rate of fire, and the rate of fire for the GPMG is 722 RPM, which is tied for the fastest out of all of the LMGs in the game. In fact, the GPMG has the exact same fire rate as the MG15. And oddly, not to mention, it almost has the exact same damage profile as well. So both weapons are almost always a 4-bullet kill with a fire rate of 722 RPM. So what does this mean for a time to kill? Basically, it's alright. You're going to get outgunned at short range. However, at medium to long range, this gun actually does pretty damn good, simply because it's going to be a 4-bullet kill to infinity with a pretty damn fast fire rate. So up close, you're going to get outgunned by SMGs, by assault rifles, by pretty much anything, but at mid-range is where this weapon really does excel. So when using this weapon, stick to mid to long range encounters, be careful you don't get sniped, but that is really where this weapon is going to excel. Now, where this weapon falls short is when it comes to bullets. This weapon does not do bullets well, and what I mean by that is this weapon has a very small magazine of 30 rounds, and you may be thinking, that doesn't sound small, there's other weapons on this game with only 5 or 10 round magazines, but you have to remember that this weapon is an LMG, and this weapon only has a 30 round magazines, whereas other magazines have upwards of 50 rounds. Not to mention that also with this smaller magazine, this weapon has an incredibly long reload time at 5.15 seconds, as you can see on screen here. It takes an insane amount of time to actually reload this weapon, and with a high fire rate and a small magazine, you're going to be reloading all of the time. So it's almost a necessity to use hustle to speed up the reload on this weapon, or extended mags to make the magazine a little bit larger. But the problem you're going to run into with this weapon is that you're going to spend through all of those 30 bullets incredibly quick and have to reload incredibly frequently with an upwards of 5-second reload time, and because of that, that's really the biggest problem with this weapon. But for the rest of the stats on this weapon, they're very stereotypical for LMGs in this game. For example, the aim down sights time on this weapon is 0.35 seconds, similar to other LMGs in the game. It's a little bit longer compared to SMGs and assault rifles, but once again, this is a LMG. On top of that, some other things we can look at are idle sway, the iron sights, and also the recoil. So, the idle sway and iron sights, they're incredible on this weapon. There is almost no interruption of iron sights, which means you really don't have to use any optic attachments whatsoever. The iron sights are very clear, very easy to see out of, and I really do enjoy them. On top of that, this weapon for an LMG has pretty damn low recoil. What you're watching here is me just firing the weapon, not controlling the recoil whatsoever, and there's very little recoil. In fact, you don't really have to burst fire this weapon unless the person is like behind head cover or really far away, and because of that, it makes for a very good stat on this weapon. To have very non-intrusive iron sights with low recoil means that you can be super accurate with this weapon without using an abundant amount of attachments on the weapon, which is very good for this weapon. So, let's answer the question, how good is this weapon? Well, it's not great, but I wouldn't say it's awful. You see, the good things about this weapon is it's always going to be a 4-bullet kill, which means it's consistent, and on top of that, it has a very high fire rate at 722 RPM, which is great for this weapon. The problem is that it has all of the negative stats of LMGs and none of the positives. For example, it has the long reload time at 5.15 seconds, and it also has the slower movement speed and slower aim down sights time of 0.35 seconds. However, the area where this is supposed to be made up for is in a damage and on top of that in a large magazine, because generally speaking LMGs have high damage and extremely large magazine. This weapon doesn't have an extremely large magazine. It's only a 30 round magazine, and because of that it doesn't really make up for any of the negative aspects of being an LMG, and that's where the real problem of this weapon goes. Out of 10 rating how good this weapon is, I would probably say it's about a 6 out of 10. You could definitely kill people with it. It's definitely good at mid-range. You just run into problems with a low damage and on top of that a very small magazine that you burn through incredibly quick because of that fast fire rate. But those are my thoughts on this weapon. It's about a 6 out of 10. But now let's get in and look at a best class setup for this weapon. So the beauty of this weapon is that you don't actually need a ton of attachments to make the weapon good. It already has very good iron sights, which means you don't need an optic attachment. It has very low recoil, which means you don't have to use a grip. So your choices are kind of open and free for what you want to use for attachments. My suggestion is to use quick draw to speed up that aim down sights time. Use extended mags to make that 30 round magazine a little bit bigger. And then your other option is either use a grip or use steady aim. I don't really think you need a grip. It may improve your aim a little bit, but I don't think you need it. Steady aim is going to improve your close gunfights because it's an LMG. It has a wide hip spread. Therefore, if you throw on steady aim, it's going to have a little bit of a smaller hip spread, and then maybe you're able to get a few kills without aiming down sights. And because of the fact that we are using 3 attachments here, you probably figure that we are using the infantry division, and that is correct, but not for the reason that you think. With this weapon, you really don't need the extra attachment, and on top of that, you're using an LMG, so you don't get a bayonet. The reason why you want to use the infantry division with this weapon is because of the bonus stat that you get extra movement speed while aiming down sights. It's basically like using a stock without having to equip a stock attachment. So because of this, you're going to be able to strafe a little bit better with this weapon and maybe outgun a little bit more opponents. On top of that, you're going to want to use the perk either Hustle or Lookout. I definitely recommend using Hustle because, as I mentioned earlier, this weapon has an extremely long reload time at 5.15 seconds, and Hustle, of course, is going to speed that up just a little bit for you. And that is really the best class setup I can recommend. That's pretty much it. That sums up the GPMG in one little video, and I'm curious what you guys have to say. Do you like this weapon? Do you have this weapon? Let me know what you think of it down in the comment section below. Also, if you're new to the channel and like what you see, you can always hit that subscribe button. But guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time guys, peace out.
We are reaching for the stars, but